Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Anne and today I'm giving you my favorite books of 2022. I'm a bit late with this, but like I said in my previous video, I really wanted to make this video and I have high hopes that I'll get it edited before the start of February. This video is always one of my favorites to make because it's so much fun to look back on what you've read throughout the year and the books you've loved the most. I had a great reading year. I had 27 5-star reads in 2022 out of 100 books, so that's great. About 5 or 6 of those were rereads, so I'm not counting those, but still that's a very high number of 5-star reads. I've managed to narrow it down to 11 books. I was making this list and I had a long list of 11 books and I realized that whichever book I would take off that list to make it an even 10 would be completely random because I loved all of these almost equally. So I decided to just go for the 11 books and run with it. I'm gonna go through them in chronological order by date read. And if you see me looking down, I'm probably looking at my reading journal because I made a reading journal at the start of the year and I wrote 1 page or sometimes 2 pages for every book I read, and that's very useful now because the first book on this list I read in January, so that's over a year ago now, and I don't know what I liked in January. This book, but why? I've got a whole list of reasons why, so that's what I'm using for this video. Without further ado, let's just start. The first book on this list you might have seen in what I showed you from my reading journal just now is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is a book that I've had on my shelves for a while and I was a bit intimidated to read it and I was expecting it to be a 4-star read at most. I'm not sure why. I think it has something to do with the hype, because this seems to be the favorite book of many people, but there are also a lot of negative reviews out there. It's a bit of a Marmite book. You either love it or hate it, and I figured I wasn't going to love it for whatever reason, but I did love it. I had a book hangover for a couple of days after this, and I don't experience that very often. I usually just move on to the next book. I always love the thrill of starting a new book, but with this one there was something that was holding me back because this was just entirely its own thing. If you don't know what The Night Circus is about, this is a bit of a historical, magical realism type book. It's set in the 19th century, towards the end of the 19th century. In essence, it tells the story of this circus that travels from place to place and you never know where it's going to end up. It just appears one day. No one knows how it does so. It seems to be kind of magical, but we get a bit of an inside look because we get to see how this circus is established and the people who live in this circus and who work in this circus. Mostly though, it's the story of 2 people, even 4 people. There are a lot of characters, but 2 people who are the clear main characters, Celia and Marco. We get to see them grow up and we get to see their role within this circus. I absolutely loved Celia. She was my favorite character in this book. I adored her. She had this ethereal, benevolent quality, but also very clear, strong woman vibes. She and Marco and the other characters made sure that I was fully immersed in this story. It took me a while to really get into the book. The writing is something to get used to. It's a reason why a lot of people don't like this. They find it slow and hard to get through, but I kind of like slow books. I love books that focus mostly on character development, and that is this as well. But once I did get into it, I didn't want it to end. I wanted to live in this book. I wanted it to go on forever. It is entirely its own thing. I don't think original is even the right word. I've never read something like this before. It feels wholly itself, separate from anything else, and I absolutely loved it for that. And another aspect that I loved was the romance. I can be quite critical of adding romance to books where it isn't necessarily needed. It sometimes feels forced, but in this it felt perfect. It completely fitted the vibe of the book, so I really liked that. There's also a lot of mystery going on and it was just a great read. Next up there's A Psalm for the Wild Build by Becky Chambers, and I've also got, let's see, where is it? The second book in the series, which came out in 2022, A Prayer for the Crown Shy here, but I'm just going to talk about A Psalm for the Wild Build. This is the first book in Becky Chambers' new series. It's a novella series. These are very short books. I'm not sure how many there will be. There are 2 now. There is a 3rd one coming this year, I think, I hope. I'm sorry for the change in quality. My camera just full on died. It isn't working anymore, which worries me. It was not just the battery, it wasn't the memory card, it was the thing itself. So that's not fun. But I'm now filming on my phone and I'll have to try really hard to look into the camera and not at the screen. But I was talking about Becky Chambers and Psalm for the Wild Build. Becky Chambers wrote my favorite series of all time, the Wayfarer series. I love those books with everything I own. I read the last one in 2021 and I was a little bit afraid about reading this book in particular because I was a bit scared that my love for Becky Chambers would only extend to that series. It would be a 1 series thing and this would be disappointing. But it wasn't. I absolutely loved this, and this book cemented Becky Chambers as my favorite author of all time. Her writing style soothes me, it comforts me, it has some quality about it that instantly, as soon as I open a book and start reading, makes me feel better about myself, about life, about everything. That has something to do with her stories as well, because she writes very hopeful stories. They are sci-fi books. This is a sci-fi series that is set on 1 planet. It is in a different universe. It has nothing to do with the Wayfarer series. It is set on a planet called Panga. This is a planet on which people used to live the way that we live, not treating the earth with respect, taking finite resources as we needed them, because we needed them. And at some point that led to a big catastrophe, and the people realized they needed to change their ways. If they wanted to aim for longevity, they needed to do something about the way they were just living life in general. So they changed their ways and became much more about keeping things in balance. And a very big thing in this world was also that they had robots who did work for them. And at some point, years and years ago, these robots suddenly gained self-awareness and they decided they didn't want to work for the people anymore, and they went off into the wilderness, but not before making 1 promise, that at some point they would come back and they would ask the people, what do you need? And this is the story of that, but also the story of Sibling Dex. Sibling Dex is a tea monk. They become a tea monk at the start of the book because they are not satisfied anymore with their lives. And they start to travel around the world of Panga and serve tea to people who need it. They will listen to their problems, and it's a very wholesome profession. It's a very wholesome way of living. But soon Sibling Dex is no longer fulfilled by that either, and they feel very guilty about that, about not fully appreciating a full life, about still feeling empty, which I thought was very relatable. I thought that was a very human feeling of thinking, well, I have a job, I have friends, I have, objectively speaking, I have a good life, so why am I not feeling good? This was something Sibling Dex is struggling with, and they decide to go off into the wilderness, to go on a trip and find themselves basically. And then they encounter a robot, and this is the first robot anyone has seen in years and years and years. This robot asks Sibling Dex, what do you need? And that's the story, and that's also the story of the 2nd book. It continues into the 2nd book, and I absolutely love this. I love the combination of philosophical and hopeful and big questions, but also small things. It goes into the philosophical aspect of self-awareness and what does it mean to be self-aware, what does make someone human, how should we treat the earth. That's a very big thing in Becky Chambers' books. How do we treat others, strangers? How do we treat the world around us? I love the books for that. The descriptions of this world are amazing as well. It was just a great read. The next book on this list is one of my most anticipated releases of 2022, and it is Gallant by V.E. Schwab. V.E. Schwab is one of my favorite writers, and I was very excited about this book because it sounded like something that was right up my alley. It sounded atmospheric and beautiful, and I like atmospheric and beautiful things. This is the story of Olivia Pryor. Olivia is nonverbal, she can't speak. She has lived in Maryland School for Girls, at Maryland School for Girls for years, and she doesn't like it there. She doesn't have a mother, she doesn't have a father, She's very miserable. But then she gets a letter from an uncle she has never met, inviting her to live at his estate, Gallant. This poses a bit of a problem because Olivia has a diary from her mother. That's the only thing she has from her mother, and in that diary it says very clearly, or maybe it's a letter that goes along with the diary. In any case, her mother has told her very clearly in written form to never go to Gallant. Whatever she does, don't go to Gallant. But of course, Olivia does go to Gallant, and when she comes there, she finds out that this uncle she supposedly got a letter from has been dead for years, and she finds only a cousin there who's very unhappy that she's there, as well as a few servants who still live there. And it's very clear that there's a mystery going on, that there are a lot of things these people aren't telling Olivia, and she wants to find out what's going on. What ensues is a bit of a spooky, creepy story about two worlds, a bit of an underworld type of thing going on, as the cover of the book already shows you a little bit. It's, like I said, it's very atmospheric, it's very beautifully written. V. Schwab has such an amazing writing style. I already knew that, but she took it to another level in Gallant because of the creepy atmosphere and also because Olivia is non-verbal. I didn't really realize this while reading, but I watched an interview with her, an event, a Waterstones event or something like that, in which she talked about having a main character who doesn't speak, how that changed her way of writing, because of course you can't have dialogue, or at least not dialogue involving the main character. Because of that, this story is mostly prose, which I hadn't even realized while reading, which is really weird, but also goes to show just how good of a writer V. Schwab is, that she made this work, that she made it beautiful. I also hadn't expected that dreams would play a really big role in this book, and I love books about dreams, as you might know, so that was a very pleasant surprise. And this is just a very beautiful book in terms of how it looks, because it includes beautiful illustrations like this. These are not just illustrations for the heck of it, they are really a part of the book. They play a role in the story, which I always think is fun. My voice is going a little bit because I did a lot of this twice already and I went to a concert yesterday, so if it becomes a bit croaky, I'm sorry. The next book I'm going to talk about is a non-fiction book, which if you told me at the start of 2022 that by the end of it there would be 2 non-fiction books on my list of favorites, I wouldn't have believed you, because I don't read a lot of non-fiction, let alone love a lot of non-fiction. But it's true, here we are. And the first one of those 2 books is The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. I wasn't excited about this book. I remember when it came out, I was a bit disappointed that it wasn't another contemporary YA book, which is what John Green is known for, of course. And I wasn't planning on reading this, but I'm not sure why, but I ended up buying it sometime last year, at the start of the year, I think. It surprisingly became one of my favorite books of the year. I absolutely loved this. This is a collection of short essays, short reviews basically, of things in the world. That's really as broad as it is. John Green reviews things from sunsets to Mario Kart to certain foods to certain media to certain diseases. He talks about a very wide range of things, which completely fits what I know about John Green, about him being interested in a lot of things. But what makes this book so very good, apart from the writing style, which is always great with John Green, is how hopeful it is. He has such a hopeful way of looking at humanity. I really like the way his mind works. I already knew that from his YA books and from his YouTube videos, but this just cemented that for me. It established that once again. There's a lot to learn from this book. There's science in it, there's a lot of information, there's history. Above all, it's just John Green looking at humanity and going, wow, that's beautiful. And I really like that, because we're not living in hopeful times, we're living in very hopeless times. And John Green acknowledges that in this book. He's realistic, he knows we're not in a good place, but he also knows that, for example, child mortality has never been lower. He talks about things like that. He talks about how things used to be very bad, how humanity is a wonderful, beautiful, miraculous thing, and it doesn't become annoying. It's just, at least I didn't think it became annoying. It was just wonderful, and it put a smile on my face, and it made me very happy. Next up we've got another surprise and another Green brother, and it is An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. This is a book that's been on my shelves for a while, and I put it on my list of 10 books to read in 2022 because I kept putting off reading it. And that's because I was a little bit scared to read this. There are some people who seem to love this, but there are also a lot of people who don't like this, who were disappointed by it, and had seen a lot of those reviews going around. And I love this. I understand why some people don't. It is like the Night Circus, but even more so, I think, very Marmite-y. It has a certain style to it that I think can become annoying to people very quickly. It took me a little while to get into it, but once I did, I absolutely loved it. I yelled when I finished this and immediately ordered the second book, which I haven't read yet, by the way, but let's not talk about that. This is the book of April May. She's 23 years old, and one night at 3 a.m. when she's roaming around New York City, she stumbles across a giant sculpture that wasn't there before, that just suddenly appeared. Delighted by its appearance and craftsmanship, she and her best friend Andy decide to make a video with it and put it up on the internet. And the next day, April wakes up to a viral video and a new life. This sets off the story because April has become the first one to film a video of this strange statue. She dubbed this statue Carl. The next morning she finds out that Carl didn't just appear in New York, it appeared in dozens of cities all throughout the world, and nobody knows why or how they got there. And it's a mystery, and it starts to become a discussion of, is this alien life? Is this aliens reaching out? What's going on? This is a story about fame because suddenly April May is very famous since she was the first one to capture video of this statue. She rolls with it entirely. She puts on a persona. She starts to make videos about this. It becomes her entire thing and she becomes world famous. And that has its repercussions for her life. It talks about what fame does to a person, but at the same time it's also the story of this mystery of what's going on with these Carls. And I thought it was great. I loved it. I loved the exploration of fame. I loved April May as a character. She is very infuriating. She is not very likable, but I like that about her. It also has a very fun narrative structure because it's basically April looking back on everything. So she inserts little comments about how she would have done things differently if only she'd known then what she knew now. And that can become annoying. I've been known to find things like that annoying. For example, in Beartown by Frederick Buckman, with this all-knowing narrator. But here it worked very well, I think. I loved April May's voice. It's very unique. It's very Hank Green. And I do wonder if he does have another story in him after this one, because it's also very clearly some of his views on fame and other things. But I didn't mind. I really liked everything about this book. It was a roller coaster ride, and I really want to read the second book. If only I'll get around to it. Hopefully soon. The sixth book on this list is Book Lovers by Emily Henry, which was another highly anticipated read for me. I read Beach Read, I think it was 2021, it might have been 2020. But this is the second book by Emily Henry that I've read, and later on in the year I also read You and Me on Vacation, and I loved both of these, but this was clearly my favorite. At that point it became my favorite romance novel, I think, but then I read the next book on this list and then that became my favorite romance novel, so we'll get to that in a bit. This tells the story of Nora and Charlie. Nora is a cutthroat literary agent at the top of her game in New York, and Charlie is a literary editor with a gift for creating bestsellers, and he's also Nora's work nemesis. Of course, we all know what's going to happen, but besides being a romance novel and enemies to lovers sort of romance novel, they're not really enemies, they just don't really like each other. It's that story, but Emily Henry's novels usually comprise more than just the romance, and I really enjoy that about them. I really appreciate that. This is also the story of Nora's relationship with her sister. This sister is very pregnant and she wants to go on a holiday with Nora. So she takes Nora to a small town somewhere in rural America. That's the basis of a huge bestseller by an author for whom Nora is the agent, if that makes sense. And Nora's sister is a big fan of this book, so she wanted to go to that town, and she has a bucket list of things she wants to do and a list of things for Nora to do, because she wants Nora to loosen up a little bit. Nora is definitely a workaholic. She is always working, she's always busy with work, but there's a reason for that, as we find out in this book. Nora is very traumatized still by the death of their mother, and that's a very big aspect of this book as well. Her relationship with her sister, how that relates to their mother and their mother's death, and it's their story as much as it is Nora and Charlie's story. When she is in that small town, which she doesn't like at all, she just wants to be back in New York, she encounters Charlie there, and it turns out that Charlie is from this town. And I just love Emily Henry's writing. She is so good at dialogue, at creating these snarky but interesting, fun characters that have depth to them, that all have something going on with them from their past. There is trauma there, there's struggle there, but it's also very light. It's a fun read, and I just love this. I love the resolution. I didn't know how this was going to end. I had hopes and I had expectations, but I didn't feel completely certain about it, which is fun. It was just a great read. Like I said, what more can I say about this? It's a book about a small town, about book lovers, it's about a bookstore, it's about family relationships, there's a romance in it. What's not to love? It was clear from the start that I was going to adore this. Next up, we've got the other romance novel that I just mentioned, and that is the third book in the Brown Sisters trilogy by Talia Hibbert. It's Act Your Age, Eve Brown. This is the story of Eve, who is the younger sister of, what are their names? Chloe Brown and Danny Brown. They both have their own books, I've read those as well. Eve Brown is a certified hot mess, it says on the back of the book. She tries so hard to be successful, to stick to a job, but there's always something that goes horribly wrong. So she kind of drifts from job to job, from passion to passion, and she doesn't know how to move on with her life. And then her parents tell her that she has to act her age, that she has to find a job and stick to it, and that they won't support her if she doesn't. And there's a conversation that goes along with that that's not really talked about in the book, but that's very harsh and possibly traumatic for Eve. But Eve then rushes out of this argument. She's very upset about this because she feels stuck. She doesn't know what she's doing wrong. And then she drives out to a small town, and there she meets Jacob. Jacob is the owner of a bed and breakfast. He's in need of a chef, and somehow, through circumstances which involve a bit of a car accident, Eve becomes the new chef in this bed and breakfast. And this is a very grumpy and sunshine romance. Eve being the sunshine and Jacob being the grumpy. It's very sweet. It has a small town bed and breakfast setting, so I'm sold on that already. But I really loved Eve as the main character. She felt very relatable in some ways, and that's because this book also features autism rep. Jacob is autistic, and Eve is still figuring things out. And I'm currently still figuring things out in that department. This book made me so happy. I loved the writing style. I loved that in the first two books already as well, but although I really liked those two romances, this was the one that really stuck with me, that made me very happy, that made me feel seen in a way. I liked Jacob, I liked the autism representation in him, and I also liked the way that Eve really flourishes and becomes herself and is allowed to be herself in this bed and breakfast and in this job. I don't feel like I can really describe just how much this book meant to me while I was reading it in that sense, but it was great. Let's just keep it at that. Next up, we've got the last book in a trilogy, and this is The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. This is the third book in the Broken Earth trilogy. The fifth season was in my top 10 last year, which is the first book in the series, and I read the second book, The Obelisk Gate, and the third book, The Stone Sky, this year. Both were 5-star reads, but the finale was amazing, so I'm putting that one on this list. This is the story. I've talked about it a couple of times already, and I still find it hard to explain it concisely. That's because the world building in this story is huge. This is a sci-fi fantasy series about a world in which natural disasters happen a lot. And not just small natural disasters that wipe out huge chunks of humanity. There are ways that they are dealing with it, and that is mainly through origins. And origins are people with the ability to connect to the earth, to influence the earth, the tectonic plates, things like that. And that sounds like a very powerful thing, as if these origins would be on top of the food chain in this world, but they are actually treated like dangerous people, not even like people. They're treated like dangerous entities. They need to be kept in check, is the thought, and they are basically treated like slaves. And it's definitely a commentary on slavery as well. And at the start of the first book, another one of these disasters, a 5th season, is put into motion, and it's promising to be a really big one, a really bad one, and like it might wipe out humanity forever. And throughout the series we find out how this disaster came to be, we find out more about this world, and we find out a lot about the characters who we're following. That's basically all I want to say about it, because I don't know what else to really say about the plot without giving things away, without making it more confusing. This is definitely a series that you really have to pay attention to. The details are important if you want to understand what's going on. It's definitely one to really keep your head at while you're reading. Not something you can just rush through, but I love that about it. A bit like I said with the Night Circus, this is something that is entirely its own, but I find it even more impressive with this series than I did it with the Night Circus, because it's entirely its own world. It's so imaginative, it's so unique. I find it hard to explain what makes this so good, but I'll leave a video to Olivia's video, from Olivia's Catastrophe. She also talked about this book in her favorites of the year, and she explains it much better than I do. So I'll leave a link to her video up above and down below. Aside from the writing and the world building, this is an exploration and a discussion of slavery, of the way we treat the world. It's sci-fi as well as fantasy. It's about motherhood, about family, about what it means to be kin. It has characters that are not likable but completely understandable. They are real people. It feels so real, all of it, while it's also so different from anything I've ever read. The finale was amazing. I was a bit afraid because endings can sometimes really make or break a book or a series, but with this, it really made it for me. I had no idea where it was going to go. I had no idea how it was going to end. It ended in quite an open way, but also a very satisfyingly open way. I really want to read more by N.K. Jemisin now. I've already got another book by her on my shelves. I hope to read that soon. But this series was a masterpiece, and I don't say that lightly. Then we've got the second non-fiction book on this list, and this is a book that I bought 7.5 years ago, started reading and never got beyond page 6, so last year I put it on my list of 10 books to read before the end of 2022, because I figured I bought this book, I think it might be a book I could like, so I should just read this. And then I started reading it in, I think, January or February, and it took me until November to finish it, until the end of November. But when I did, I absolutely adored it. If there's one book that made me feel everything, all the things that make me feel incredibly emotional, it's this book. And it is The Brontës, A Life in Letters by Juliet Barker. The title basically explains what this book is. It is a biography of the Brontës sisters, told through letters written by them and in a lesser sense to them as well. It also includes letters by their father, a few by their brother and some other people they had contact with, but it's mostly letters written by Charlotte Brontë. It was amazing. I love the Brontë sisters, I love their works, I love the idea of them as a family, having so much talent and coming together and writing and supporting each other through it, through a life that was quite difficult, as this book made clear as well. I think this was the best way to approach this biography. I know Juliet Barker has written an actual biography of the Brontë sisters, but this just made it feel so like you're right there. You're reading the actual words by these actual people about their actual lives instead of something that someone years later had to say about it. I have a newfound respect and admiration for Charlotte Brontë, who used to be my least favorite Brontë. Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë is one of my all-time favorite books. I absolutely adored The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Brontë, When I read it a few years ago, I was completely blown away by that. And I did love Jane Eyre as well, but less so than the other two. I think there's also a bit more mystery surrounding Emily, especially, but also Anne, because they died younger than Charlotte did and they have written fewer books. In the case of Emily, only one and some poetry. And Charlotte has written, I think, 4 novels. But this was mostly, like I said, Charlotte's letters. And she was an extraordinary woman. She had an extraordinary mind. Some of the things were still so relatable to me now as a reader in 2022, about 200 years after these people were living, which was amazing to me. I had a very strong emotional reaction to this book, to these letters, as we were approaching the end, and I knew that the deaths of Branwell, the Bronte brother, the only Bronte brother, and then Emily and then Anne were coming up in very close succession to one another. I was just dreading it, and I felt genuine grief for these people. Reading about it, reading Charlotte's letters about what happened, it was harrowing, really. She was an extraordinary woman. Her sisters were extraordinary women. And I'm so glad that I finally read this book. I think the reason why it was slow going for me at first was because it really starts with letters they were writing when they were really young, when they were teenagers or even a little bit younger. And it only really got truly interesting as we get to them as adult women, when they have really interesting things to say, when they start writing their books, when it's about that as well. When things start to get a bit more philosophical, it's very personal. Charlotte really didn't intend for other people to read these letters. They can be snarky sometimes, and they were wonderful, and I loved it. The next book is Greywaren by Maggie Stiefvater. It was another highly anticipated read for me this year, even though I kept forgetting that it would come out in 2022. I think it came out in October, and I got around to reading it in December. This is the final book in the Dreamer trilogy. The Dreamer trilogy is basically a spin-off kind of follow-up trilogy to the Raven Cycle, which is Maggie Stiefvater's most famous series. This trilogy centers around Ronan Lynch. Ronan is a dreamer. He can go into his dreams and take stuff out of it with him to the real world, which is a very interesting concept and of course something that I love. But it's not just about Ronan, there are other characters here as well. We've got a prophecy that the world is going to end because of a dreamer, and because of that, dreamers are being hunted. That's basically what's going on in the first book, with a lot of other stuff going on as well. In this final book, things are coming to a head, they are coming to a close. The things happening in this book are big, they are loud, a lot is happening, and it's basically, I've described it previously as the Raven Cycle on steroids, and I loved it. Her writing style is something else. I knew that, and I knew that I loved her writing style, but when I started reading this, I was reminded of it again. I had forgotten just how original and how beautiful her style really is, how strange in a way, in a beautiful, beautiful way. I love these characters. I've come to love them over the Raven Cycle, but then the new characters in this as well, although there were some I was a bit less interested in. There are some that I've really come to love over the course of this trilogy. This was a wild roller coaster ride from start to finish. The entire trilogy, but especially this book as well. I was afraid for multiple characters. I didn't know what was going to happen. It's imaginative, it's crazy. There were reveals in this that I would never have thought possible. It was just amazing, and I loved the epilogue. It even made me tear up, and that very rarely happens when I read books. But a book about dreamers by Maggie Stiefvater, with all of the crazy things. She pulls all the stops. It was just, I loved it. And then the 11th and final book is actually 4 books. So no, we're counting it as 1 book. It's a graphic novel series, Finding Home by Harry Connor. I read these over the course of 2022. I first got them as PDFs because this is a self-published graphic novel series, and the author had announced that they were going to stop publishing them because of their health. They weren't able to keep up. I had never read these before, and I thought, am I really going to spend quite a lot of money on 4 books that I don't know yet if I will enjoy, even though it seems from the description and from the beautiful artwork that I will enjoy them. And I decided not to do that and go for the PDF versions instead, which was also something you could do. But then I read the first book and I thought, well, fuck. I really want the physical books because this could be one of my favorite graphic novel series of all time. And then I put myself on a mailing list, and in the end I got an email that there were still a few copies to be sold, and I got the physical copies. And then I started reading them all again. I'm going to put them down because they're heavy. I'm just going to show you the last one because that's the most beautiful one, I think. This is a graphic novel series that is a fantasy story. It's about two men. I don't really know how to pronounce their name. There's Jeppy. Is he an elf? Nymph? Something like that. I should know this, but I've forgotten. And then there's Janek, who is a human man. Before the start of this series, they've encountered each other on their travels and they decide to travel on together. And Jeppy basically brings Janek back to his hometown of Arkesh. They travel mostly through a forest, they encounter dangerous things, but mostly it's kind of a cozy, slow-going read. We get to know more about these characters, we get to see them develop a relationship. It turns into a romantic relationship, it's really a slow burn romance, and we get to learn more about this world as well. It can be quite heavy because there is trauma that is addressed in this book, there is mental illness as well, but it's just so beautiful, it's so wonderfully done. The artwork, as you can see on the cover, is beautiful. The colors are really, really beautiful. This final one isn't set in the forest anymore, but the first one I was just blown away just by how beautiful it all was. This color palette of green and browns and oranges, these warm colors, I love that. That's really something I gravitate towards. Just this slow burn romance, this story of two people getting to know each other, finding out about each other's pasts and respecting one another and trying to help one another. The mental illness and the trauma thing is really handled with respect and with care, and there's just so much love in these books, and that really made me so happy, and it turned this into my favorite graphic novel series, along with Heartstopper, of course. And I really want to read them again already, even though I've already read the first two times. So that's it. Those are all of my favorite books of 2022. I think this is going to be a long ass video because I've been filming for a long time now, also due to the camera problems. I hope this is okay. I'm filming on my phone for the first time, really, this kind of video. We'll see. In the comment down below, please let me know what was your favorite book or some of your favorite books of 2022 if you can't pick just one. Please like this video if you liked it and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of me in the future. And have a wonderful day. Bye!